For members, now move to questions to the Minister or to the Executive Office, and I call Michelle Guy.
Mr. Speaker.
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Maze Long Cash Development Corporation business plan had been submitted to the Executive Office, but we understand that it has been further reviewed by the Development Corporation in light of their current budget allocation. The business plan will be revised now that the outcome of the current internal reallocation exercise is known. The member will appreciate that's only happened today, so they will consider the outcome of that, and this will determine what is achievable from a budgetary perspective. We will consider the updated plan as soon as possible. Once approved, it will be published on the Maze Long Cash Development Corporation website. In the interim, the Maze Long Cash Development Corporation continue to operate in line with their agreed remit. We are committed to working with the Development Corporation to realise the potential of the site to the benefit of all, but we recognise that we must move only with consensus and sensitivity. No decisions have yet been made on any future of the site.
Cathal Boyle, Michelle Guy.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. You and I share the constituency of Lagan Valley where the Maze Long Cash site is situated, and we understand its strategic importance for the area. So my question to you is, as Deputy First Minister, with the access and the influence that that provides, what are you doing to deliver the potential of this site? Because it seems at the minute the politics of this site is taking priority over delivery.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. As outlined, there is a significant amount of history associated with this site. There's also a huge amount of potential with the site, but moving forward we can only do so with sensitivity to those victims and survivors most impacted by the events associated and within that site, and that's what I will be doing.
Cathal Boyle.
Deputy First Minister, at question time back in September, the First Minister referenced a meeting with the MLK Development Corporation back in July. So could I put it to you, can the DFM update us on discussions that have subsequently taken place that will inform a future roadmap for the regeneration of the site?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. We had an update from the board. There is a new board in place with 6 new members. They are, of course, taking a look at some of the plans and proposals that had been made by the previous board. They're still in a very early stage in terms of them working together, but I do believe that there's a significant amount of talent and enthusiasm and ambition in that board. Of course, anything proposed by the board, including the budget, but also the activities within that site, will require agreement by the First Minister and myself. However, there are a number of existing organisations, as you will be aware, on that site, so part of their role will be to continue to support those excellent organisations such as the Air Ambulance and the Ulster Aviation Society.
Jonathan Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy First Minister will know that yesterday marked a significant day for many of us who attended Acts of Remembrance. I last night attended the UDR Association Act of Remembrance in Mount Norris Presbyterian Church, where I joined with UDR widows, including my great aunt, who lost her husband in the Glenanne Army Barracks explosion many years ago. Most of these victims have experienced much hurt, much re-traumatisation and no justice. So can the Deputy First Minister give us an assurance to this House that there will be nothing on the site that will hurt victims and survivors of terrorism?
Minister.
In the Executive Office we have many responsibilities in relation to victims and survivors of the Troubles. That means trying to meet their needs, but it also means being sensitive to the concerns and the issues that they face. The victims and survivors in Northern Ireland are those that have given the most, and we must always be very sensitive to that as we move forward. We must recognise their loss, and we must recognise the legitimacy of the concerns and issues that they have. It is therefore, as I said earlier, absolutely important that nothing happens on this site that would further any hurt or pain, and anything that happens must be done with full sensitivity to those victims and survivors.
Matthew O'Toole.
Deputy First Minister, you said it's important that nothing on this happens on this site which gives offence to victims. I mean, I agree But the problem is nothing's happening on the site at all. The saga of the Maze Long Kesh development has been going on longer than the mousetrap. It's been sitting there, a wasting asset. If the Executive Office cannot progress this, can I suggest that two things happen? One, a simple, poignant memorial is put up for all those who want to remember at that site. But number two, the rest of it is given over to either social housing or some other productive form of economic development, because this farce cannot continue indefinitely.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. If he wants to tramp over the concerns of victims, then that is up to him. I will not be engaging in that. I will be moving forward with consensus with victims and survivors, because anything that we do, we should not be furthering any concern or hurt. And therefore, it is not for me to decide what is the way forward and impose that on those that have been associated with this site and have hurt and sensitivities in relation to it. As I have said, I want to unlock the potential of the site, but that has to be done in a particular way and moving forward with that consensus. But he is also incorrect when he says that there is nothing happening on that site. There are some very, very good activities on that site, not least the Balmoral Show, which I understand that he has attended. All of the activities around the Icon Centre, the aviation, Ulster Aviation Society, an excellent organisation that attracted 7,000 visitors over the Heritage Open Day weekend, and of course the Air Ambulance, where since they have started there in 2017, have been called out some 4,500 times. That's just some of the activities that are taking place. Of course, I would like to unlock the full potential of the site, but we should recognise the good work that's already happening there at the moment.
Timothy Gaston.
Speaker, Deputy First Minister, your party colleague Lord Dodds is on record as saying, however it is dressed up, whatever spin is deployed, the preservation of the H blocks, including the hospital wing, would become a shrine to the terrorists who committed suicide in the Maze in the 1980s. That would be obnoxious to the vast majority of people and is something unionist people cannot accept. Will you give a commitment today that you agree with your party colleague in that statement that he made?
Minister.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. The member will be aware that that building is listed. That was listed, as I understand it, at the request of the then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland at a period of direct rule and outside of the control or context of either the Northern Ireland Executive or this House. Where I am absolutely clear, and I will reiterate this again, is that nothing will happen on that site as long as I am Deputy First Minister that would cause hurt and pain to victims and survivors. That is my promise to victims and survivors. There is nothing that I would wish to do to cause any further pain and hurt on those who have suffered the most and who have given the most in terms of Northern Ireland.
Stephen Dunn.
Question 2.
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that victims and survivors understandably see contributions from the institutions as an important measure of accountability. So we will welcome the interim payments that we have received from 3 institutions, Bernardo's, the De La Salle Order and the Good Shepherd Sisters, as well, and I'm pleased to say, an additional contribution by the Diocese of Down and Connor just this month, specifically in respect of the De La Salle run homes. Engagement will continue with these institutions on final contributions following the closure of the HIA Redress Board. Constructive discussions on appropriate contributions from the Irish Church Missions, the Sisters of Nazareth and the Sisters of St Louis are ongoing. We have committed to publishing the details of these contributions when the process has concluded. Members will understand that this is a live negotiation with a number of these, hence the sensitivity around some of the detail. But we would encourage all victims and survivors who intend to make an application to the board to do so as soon as possible and in advance of next year's deadline.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Would she agree with me that it is indeed important that the outstanding institutions recognise the harm that has been caused and contribute to the scheme? And equally, as you have stated, with the scheme beginning to wind down, is it your assessment that time is running out for these outstanding institutions to do the right thing and make a contribution?
Minister.
Thank you. The Hart report, following the inquiry into historical institutional abuse, very clearly highlighted things that were done wrong by a number of the institutions in relation to the treatment of children in their care. And therefore, of course, it is right and proper that there is an acknowledgement of that by those institutions, and that those institutions should make a contribution in relation to the cost of this. Of course, we are realistic, and we did not want for victims and survivors to have to wait for those institutions to decide when to give and what to give. So therefore, we had decided to move forward with the redress board in order to try to address and support those victims and survivors. But the negotiations will continue in terms of getting that all-important contribution. I'm really pleased to say as well that the work of the redress board is winding down. I understand it with only 38 applications left to be scheduled. So that is a significant amount of work that the board has completed, and that's why at the moment we are appealing to any remaining victims and survivors to come forward and seek that redress if they haven't already.
And I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer so far. Just to follow on from that last point in terms of outreach to those harder to reach victims, is the Department doing anything specifically to try and actually reach out to people to make them aware of the redress scheme and of the services that are available to them? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, and thank the member for her question. Yes, very important as we head towards the closure date of the scheme next year. We want to make sure that those that are entitled to this support have been reached. Now, there have been a number of campaigns previously, including a leaflet that was put through every door. But of course, we want to make sure in the last months of this scheme, so therefore there's a new campaign. There'll be radio adverts. We've written out to all of the MLAs and various organisations asking them to share that information. We've also sent the information to all of the local councils across the UK and Ireland, and indeed reached out to organisations, for example, in Australia that we have worked with before to try to support that. We of course work with our local media and international media as well in terms of placing stories to try to promote to the readership that this scheme remains open and that there is an encouragement for them to come forward before it closes next year.
Connie Egan.
Deputy First Minister, has the Executive Office given any consideration to bring forward legislation to compel further contributions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her questions. Of course, these are all legal issues that we have examined, and indeed it may be appropriate to have further engagement on this in terms of the work of the committee as well. There are, of course, a number of legal aspects of this that do make that complicated, not least because of the nature of the report. The report did not examine every institution, and therefore the findings within that report differ from, for example, if it were a finding of the court in a civil or criminal case. But of course the redress scheme goes beyond that. And extends beyond that. So there are some challenges with doing that, but we've made very, very clear that we believe that there is a strong moral responsibility on these institutions to step up. They have contributed to an apology for their actions. They've acknowledged that there were things that were done that ought not to have been done, and therefore it is right and proper that they do step up and make these contributions, not just because it is a financial contribution to this scheme, but because it sends a very clear message of acknowledgement about the role and the feelings that they had as well.
Neil McLaughlin.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister, for the answers to your question. The Commissioner, Fiona Ryan, has been doing really good work in all of this area. Would your department be given any consideration to extending her role?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. The member will be aware that this work is winding down in terms of the redress board, but of course the pain and the trauma and the issues will continue for many years beyond the closure of this scheme, and indeed will impact those that were involved indeed for the rest of their lives. So there are needs there. There are a number of things that we are doing, for example through the support mechanisms of the Victims and Survivors Service, who have taken on this new role of trying to support victims in the historical institutional abuse, along with Advice NI and other organisations as well. So I think it is important as we move towards the closure that we do look at a range of supports, and of course we will take a look at that proposal that you have made as well. But what we want is a system and a service that is there to meet the needs of victims, no matter what that looks like, and would be actively considering that.
Paul McGrath. Speaker. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will ask the Junior Minister to take this question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Central Good Relations Fund is open to all constituted voluntary and community groups, including minority ethnic groups, to deliver good relations projects where there is evidence of good relations need. Many projects provide opportunities for sustained, meaningful contact between those of different backgrounds to actively target sectarianism and racism, for example, via cultural awareness workshops, community dialogue sessions, or formal training in tackling racist or sectarian attitudes and behaviours. Since 2016, over £25 million has been awarded, enabling more than 780 projects to be delivered, reaching over 260,000 people here. Outcomes data for the 2023-24 period indicates that 83% of those aged 13 years or more and 68% of those aged 12 years or less reported a positive change across their knowledge, behaviour and attitude toward people from different backgrounds due to their participation in the Central Good Relations Fund project. The opening budget allocation for the Central Good Relations Fund in 2024-25 was £1.65 million. Through the June monitoring round, we secured a further £625,000, bringing the total allocation to £2,275,000. This is an increase of over 60% over the 2023-24 allocation for the fund and demonstrates our ongoing commitment to good relations work. This has allowed 59 good relations projects to be supported in the 2024-25 period, reaching around 22,500 people across all council areas. In addition, though, through approximately £1.1 million funding per annum under the Minority Ethnic Development Fund from 2022 to 2025, we are supporting 31 successful applications to support our minority ethnic communities to help eradicate racism.
Mr Dunn. Sorry.
We're going to thank the Junior Minister for the answer. Given that there was a reliance this year on monitoring round money to be able to fill the gap, could we get some assurance that next year the full budget will be applied for up front so that those groups that do work in the community in terms of good relations are able to continue that work, they're able to provide their services, but they don't have the fear that the money is going to be reduced and jobs will be lost?
Junior Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for the supplementary question. He'll be aware that the bid for £625,000 was lodged for the Central Good Relations Fund and was fully met. The bid for £1.5 million for the Communities in Transition Tackling Paramilitary Activity Programme was also lodged through June monitoring, and the bid was fully met, and no further bids were submitted as part of that October monitoring. There's also the issue, I suppose, around the multi-year funding, which may come into play as well, and we're delighted by the commitment of the UK Government at Westminster in the Chancellor's statement at the end of July for future spending reviews to cover at least 3 years, with a review every 2 years. This will provide greater transparency and allow departments to plan more effectively and efficiently for further investment in public services.
Sharon.
And thank the Junior Minister for that answer. Minister, could you give an indication as to when the application process will open for 25-26?
Thank you, and thank the member for her supplementary question too. For the 2025-26 Central Good Relations Fund, it will open for applications this December, so 2024. The further details will be provided on the Executive Office website, social media platforms, and emails will be issued to mailing lists along with details of how to apply.
Morris Bradley.
Speaker, and I thank the Junior Minister for her answers so far. But can I ask the Junior Minister to describe some examples of what projects this work has supported with young people across Northern Ireland to date?
Minister.
Thank you, and thank the member for his question. In 2024-25, approximately 61% of projects within the Central Good Relations Fund are delivering against the TBUC priority, our children and young people. Almost 8,000 young people will be directly impacted as a result. In 2024-25, through the Central Good Relations Fund, 2 projects are being supported, which include participants from my own area of South Antrim. These are Ulster Hockey with funding of £45,000, targeting 620 participants, and Belfast Electronic Arts and Music Academy with funding of almost £27,000, targeting 90 participants. For Your Freedom and Honours received an award of £33,620 and is delivering within the South Antrim area as well. And under the TBUC Camps programme, one group in South Antrim was awarded £30,000 to deliver 3 TBUC Camps projects engaging approximately 80 young people. Under the Planned Interventions programme, 2 groups in South Antrim were awarded a total of £10,750 to deliver 2 projects engaging a total of 59 young people. £94,000 was awarded to Antrim Newton Abbey Council from the District Council's Good Relations programme to deliver good relations programmes which include projects engaging participants in the South Antrim constituency. So those are some examples. Thank you.
Peter McReynolds.
Minister, for her answers so far. In August this year, we saw racism and violence on our streets, and I personally had friends and colleagues affected by what they saw, heard and experienced during that period. What bids have been made to address the ongoing increase in racist attacks since these scenes took place?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for questions. So I'm just trying to find an answer here. Apology, I can't find the answer here, but obviously we abhor racism and some of the activities that happened in the past months, and we've been very strong in condemning those. We do look forward to the review of all these policies to include and make sure that race is included and acted upon. But if the member wants to follow up further in writing, we can actually provide a fuller answer.
Declan Kearney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 4, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The appointment of the Commissioners and the members of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression is essential to implementing the provisions of the Identity and Language Northern Ireland Act 2022, for which the Executive Office is responsible. As previously advised, we have instructed our officials to develop further advice, which will include documentation for each competition, including candidate information booklets and details of selection panels to enable the competitions to be launched. To finalise this advice, a competition initiation meeting, it's called a CIM, needs to be conducted for each competition, and we are pleased to advise that the selection panels have now been formed and that the preparations for the CIMs are at an advanced stage. We hope to have held a SIM for each of the competition in the coming weeks. We would also remind members that the competitions will be run in line with the Commissioner for Public Appointment guidelines.
Mr. Kearney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers so far. Deputy First Minister, in addition to that, can you give us an exact timescale for the 3 commissioners to be employed? And can you tell us when those 3 commissioners will be formally hired?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his follow-up question. As indicated in the initial answer, there's a lot of detail and process that goes into making sure that these public appointments abide by the guidance and the rules of the Public Appointments Commissioner's Office, but also to ensure that they are fair and open in the appropriate way. So, of course, that there is that process that needs to take place. What will now happen will be that we, the First Minister and myself, will receive up the final proposal around the criteria for these, the adverts, the documentation as indicated, the booklets. We will take a look at that, and if satisfied that that meets the requirements, then that can go out and be placed. I think the appointments processes would generally take around a 6-month period of time. That will depend on the interest, of course, to some of the appointments. Some appointments have more interest than others, and that can complicate things. It would then be a requirement that for each post, a person or people deemed appointable that would come through that process would then come back to the First and Deputy First Minister for consideration and agreement. On the odd occasion, you don't get anybody that crosses a line in terms of anybody who is deemed appointable as part of a public appointments process, but we hope that that will not be the case in relation to these appointments. But as I've outlined, look, this is a lengthy process, but having that documentation up hopefully in the next couple of weeks will enable that to go out and commence that 6-month process of public appointments.
Kingston.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers so far. And can the Minister confirm that the business case ensures a fair and equitable approach to both the Irish Language Commissioner and the Commissioner for the Ulster Scots and the Ulster British tradition?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his important question, because I do think at the heart of that is that important message that this will be brought forward in a fair and equitable basis. And that's why I welcome the fact that the business case has been prepared and advanced and agreed on that basis of the two offices having a fair and equitable amount of funding initially. What will then happen when the commissioners are in place is that they will bring forward their business plans and their corporate plans, what they want to do in terms of their activities, and of course again in recognition of the numbers of people from those traditions throughout Northern Ireland, then that these need to be advanced in a fair and equitable basis, because that is what is right and what is proper. Public funding should always be distributed in that fair way.
Anna Holland.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. I was just wondering if you could outline what role the Commissioners will have in working alongside the North-South language bodies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for her question. These are statutory roles, so of course they have their statutory responsibilities, and those are set down in the legislation. But of course I would imagine that the Commissioners of course would engage with the North-South bodies and across the UK as well in terms of advancing some of those aspects. In terms of Irish language being a recognised minority language of the United Kingdom, but also in terms of the Ulster British tradition will have its links very strongly, as does Ulster Scots, for example, with Scotland, but of course links around the Anglo-Irish traditions and different British traditions right across this United Kingdom as well. So I would imagine that, yes, of course, they will engage, but that will be set out, one assumes, in their first business plans and corporate plans.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, from a written question already, we know that the set-up costs for these Commissioners' offices is £8.3 million, with £9 million annual running costs. Could I just ask the Minister, has that money now been set aside for this financial year, or are we really looking at this not happening now till we go into the next financial year? Minister.
Thank you. The preparation plans for the Commissioner's Office will have a sense about when it is likely that that expenditure is required. And of course, as a principle of good public expenditure, you would not try to take that funding into a year in which it would not be accrued or spent. In this case, the Commissioners are yet to be appointed, and as outlined, the appointments process is likely to take at least 6 months. So that would bring us into the next financial year in any event. However, even in that situation, then the Commissioners' offices would need to be established, staff would need to be recruited, systems would need to be put in place, and then you would be looking to the plans and proposals put forward by those Commissioners. I would fully expect they would require a resource to support them to do that, but also some time rightly in order to get their initial plans put in place. I think, like anything, you would of course want to move towards a multi-year approach to this in terms of their plan, but I would anticipate that we would have some early indication about that activity. So the member will appreciate that that will not be done tomorrow or next month. That will take some time. But as that develops, of course, the spending profile for this will be set out and is likely to be not in this financial year, but indeed in the years to come.
Justin McNulty.
Can I thank the Minister, the Deputy First Minister, for her answers far. Deputy First Minister, I understand that £3.8 million has been allocated for each body once established. Can you tell us how this figure was arrived at, and can you give us your assessment of whether this funding is fair, proportionate and equitable, and will it be enough for each body?
The First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. I suspect if you went to anybody and asked was it enough, that they would indicate it would not be enough. Of course, what we can do within the remit of the statutory responsibilities for each body has to fit within the overall financial position of the executive of the department and what is possible and achievable. The amount of money is set out has come out of a very detailed business case, but that is very much predicated on a core staff complement and start-up costs. So that is very much around a small staffing complement for each of those offices. Any proposals around any additional spend, for example on activity or projects or grant funding, that doesn't sit with the Commissioner's Office. Grant funding would sit in the Central Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, as opposed to with the particular Commissioners, and that is set out in detail in that legislation.
Just to make Paula Bradshaw. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We recognise how important the issue of clerical child abuse is, and we are aware of the devastating impact it has had on many people. The junior ministers met victims and survivors in September through the reference group to hear first-hand about their experiences and to restate our commitment to this important work. Work is progressing on the 3 separate pieces of research that we have commissioned, one examining records held by faith organisations and statutory agencies, one recording experiences and the expectations of victims and survivors, and one examining the safeguarding policies and practices of faith groups. We intend to shortly call for victims and survivors to come forward to participate in that research. The research is an important step in deciding the best way forward to address the impact and legacy of this abuse. We look forward to the conclusion of the research projects in spring next year and subsequently seeing the final report and recommendations. And as with all of these things, this will be a trauma-informed response, and we will, of course, move forward very conscious of the pain and trauma that many of these victims and survivors of clerical abuse are still going through.
We have no time for further questions on tabled questions, so we move to the topical questions and call Matthew O'Toole.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, in August we gathered here to express our horror, outrage and revulsion at the race hate that we saw on the streets of Belfast. Can I ask what specifically the Executive Office, the First and Deputy First Minister, have done since then to tackle the growing scourge of racism in this society?
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his important question because it provides the opportunity once again to put on record our absolute rejection of racism and of any action based on hate or discrimination or prejudice. What we saw over the summer was entirely unacceptable, and that is the message that we have been sending. So there are a number of different aspects to what we have been doing. First of all, to show that joint and shared political leadership, not just within the First Minister and Deputy First Minister's office, but of course across this executive, to call out at every opportunity these terrible actions. Secondly, we have been liaising with statutory agencies through our arm's length bodies, through our funders, but also importantly with the PSNI, and indeed we met with the Chief Constable, I think it was just last week, where we also raised this issue once again. I think it is incredibly important that we work in a connected and collaborative way in tackling the scourge of racism and the violence and disorder brought about by that. But in addition, we've been looking at many of the funding schemes within the department. So, for example, for all of our good relations schemes, I've asked and we received the figures around a very significant participation rate for those from minority ethnic communities. Of course, good relations is not just between those of different political or religious beliefs, but of course between people of different races and ethnic identities as well. So I think it would be really positive to ensure that those are all fully mainstreamed within the funding schemes that we have, and we encourage other departments to do so also.
Mr. O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, I don't doubt your commitment to this, but since we've come back we haven't seen progress on a standalone hate crime bill from the Justice Minister. We haven't seen the publication of a racial equality strategy. We don't know when we're going to get a refugee integration strategy, and I'm afraid we don't have clarity on whether good relations money is going to be specifically directed towards getting outcomes for people like those in my constituency who face being hounded out of their homes, where kids are being injured with glass because masonry is thrown through their front windows. I'm afraid we do now need to move beyond warm words and see practical action. So can I suggest that on all the areas that can I ask whether on all the areas that I listed we will see delivery and more specifics from this executive by the end of this year?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his follow-up question. There was a lot more I could have said in the initial answer, but I'm very conscious of time and the length of response. But of course, we are also working on those issues, bringing forward that race relations legislation, but importantly as well that refugee integration strategy, which has been promised, and work is ongoing, and I can give the House that reassurance that work is ongoing, and we are endeavouring to bring that forward as soon as possible. But he is absolutely right, this is not just about words, but I would say words matter and leadership matters, and what we say and what we do on this issue, both in terms of the media and in this place, in terms of standing together against racism, is important. But you're absolutely right, that needs to be followed up by action. That is why officials in the Executive Office have been working closely throughout the period with Belfast City Council and other councils around that practical support and that financial support. We have a dedicated ethnic minority funding scheme under our race relations strategy, and that of course has been protected and will be moving forward. We're looking at issues around multi-year budgets and better support under that. But what I've indicated to him is that also that needs to be mainstreamed within our good relations schemes, such as Central Good Relations, such as our TBUC camps and others, because that is a really good opportunity to ensure that those key principles about respect and tolerance of difference and different identities starts at the earliest possible opportunity in relation to prevention.
Minister, when are we going to see the new or amended ministerial code so we can debate it in this chamber?
I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for his question. As I understand, there had been some work done on that. Of course, the recent legal case made clear that the ministerial code has to be read subject to the decisions under the legislation, for example, on the Executive Functions Act. So therefore, anything that we do, regardless of what the ministerial code says in relation to that, it has to be read in relation to the actual primary legislation. Now, that doesn't, I think, is a matter of good legislating. That is not an acceptable position as a permanent position moving forward. So work on that is progressing, and I have no doubt that that will be brought forward in due course. But I do reassure the member that any conflicting aspects in the ministerial code to, for example, the Executive Functions Act, it doesn't create an issue or problem with the Northern Ireland Executive or the functions therein.
I thank the Minister for the answer, and it is something I've asked about on multiple occasions, and particularly with the lack of openness, transparency and integrity from some ministers over this last number of months, particularly in the McMonagle affair and child safeguarding. So would the Minister agree with me that actually it's really important that we have that new and amended ministerial code to give us confidence so that we can ensure that we hold ministers to account when we have to hold them to account? Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, to be fair, in relation to the required changes of the Ministerial Code, that really pertains to the particular aspects of the Executive Functions Act. And those were in relation to, for example, clarification on the types of matters to come to the Northern Ireland Executive for consideration and agreement, and that of course arose out of some confusion perhaps, or lack of clarity in some of the subsequent legal cases. So it is a technical point. There is a point around the treatment of planning applications and consideration of planning matters by the Executive. So those are technical matters that require a change to the Ministerial Code. There had not been, as far as I am aware, proposals to change the obligations that all ministers are under in relation to the key principles as set out, including transparency and openness. So of course that endures, that exists, and all ministers must comply with that Ministerial Code, which remains in place currently.
Down for South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answers so far. Following on from the American election last week, I extend my congratulations to the new President-elect Donald Trump, and I want to ask the Deputy First Minister her plans for engagement going forward with the new incoming administration to highlight the continued importance of investment, the US foreign direct investment in Northern Ireland.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for her question. Of course, Northern Ireland has been a huge beneficiary of foreign direct investment by the US in particular. That is why there's been significant time taken over the recent years with working within the US to try to further build on that very successful FDI. And of course, our relationship with the United States goes much beyond just trade. We have those very historic bonds in terms of our history and our heritage. I believe Northern Ireland indeed has the links to the most US presidents in any other jurisdiction per head of the population. So that is something that we should build on as well, not just those trade links, but improving our opportunities with the US based on our heritage and those links. I'm very conscious that the Vice President, for example, has those Ulster-Scots links, or Scots-Irish as the US refer to them. So I look forward to engaging with the President and the President-elect and the incoming administration to further for the benefits of Northern Ireland.
Ms Forsyth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. I'm pleased to take any opportunity to raise the importance of the Ulster Scots links between Northern Ireland and America, and I believe that we have great opportunities with having JD Vance within the White House. Does the Deputy First Minister think that this is a key opportunity for our Northern Irish historical links with America to build going forward?
Deputy First Minister.
Absolutely. A key part of the international relations work that we do is around what is often referred to as soft diplomacy and cultural diplomacy, and that is very much about reaching out in that way and explaining those links, the shared culture, the shared history. And I think so many people in the US don't realise that they have that Ulster Scots or Scots-Irish heritage, and indeed heritage from the UK and Ireland, of course. There's very rich vein of that runs right through the US. So I think it's not just a responsibility of us to try to promote that, but it's a really good opportunity for us to promote that. And by using our shared history, those bonds, and not least also in trade, because of course many of those Ulster Scots that went on to the US invested heavily in trade and business and helped build America as well. So there's lots of opportunities. The Communities Minister had a very successful trip, as I understand, over there on this very issue, and I look forward to building on that and just sharing our shared experiences.
Alan Robinson.
Given the significant role that family farms in the province given the significant role that family farms play in the province's agricultural sector, has the Deputy First Minister had, or does she plan to have, discussions with the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, on the potential effects of the recent changes to inheritance tax legislation and how these changes may impact the future of family-owned farms in Northern Ireland?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his very important and timely question, because I know that many farmers and farming families throughout Northern Ireland are particularly concerned at the moment in terms of those proposed changes by the Chancellor. I had taken the opportunity to raise directly with the Chancellor and with the Prime Minister prior to this budget the concerns about the rumoured changes, particularly in relation to agricultural relief. However, that was not listened to, and that is now been put in place in terms of the announcements around the budget. We will continue to fight that fight. I am pleased to say that I will be attending the rally on Monday night, organised by the Ulster Farmers Union. I would encourage all others with concerns to do likewise at the site of the Royal Agricultural Society at the Maze Long Kesh, in order to show our strong opposition to this. Farming is at the heart of our economy here in Northern Ireland. Farming is incredibly important. Our local farmers provide good quality, nutritious, locally grown, locally supported, locally produced food. We are a net supplier of food across this UK. That is something to be valued. That is something to be protected. We should be standing up for our farmers, and I am determined that that is what I will be doing as we move forward, including on this very important issue.
Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I very much appreciate the response from the Deputy First Minister today. Can you further update the House on what steps the Executive has taken to fully assess and address the negative impacts on family farms, and does she expect, through discussions through Executive colleagues, if support or guidance will be issued to help support farm businesses to navigate through these changes?
Thank you, and I thank the member for his follow-up. Look, absolutely, there are some things that people can do, and some of that is around planning. I know that some farms and farming have already done that, but of course there's more that we can do to support that through, in particular, the Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. I was glad to see, for example, some organisations already advertising some of those activities, but let's be very clear. If indeed the consequences and impacts for farmers of these changes around agricultural relief could be negated or mitigated against in full, then there was no point of the Chancellor putting this in place. The fact that this tax has been reduced in such a way indicates that the Chancellor believes that a tax will be raised by this change. And if tax is going to be raised by this change, then it is raised on the back of our farmers. Farmers need support. They are not a cash cow to raise tax for anything else. Farmers do an incredible job. They require support, not additional burdens. And I believe that we can have a strong, united voice from the Northern Ireland Executive to say to the Chancellor and to say very strongly, protect our farmers. We will be fighting for our farmers. We are on the side of farmers on this issue, and we are asking the Chancellor to change course urgently.
Paula Bradshaw.
Mr Speaker, just to come back to my question, because I didn't get in for supplementary around the clerical child abuse, and we saw in the media today the Church of England senior figures in it. There's a bit of a spat around the Mackin report that's been launched into the 100 boys and young men in the Christian summer camp. I'm just wondering, Deputy First Minister, to what degree is the research that you outlined earlier, is that going to actually penetrate into actually the organised youth groups, for example, that have been using church premises for their activities? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. I thank the member for her question. It's a very important aspect of this, because really the approach of doing this research first was very much based on the reality that there is some anecdotal and other evidence coming forward around what has happened, but there's very little insight into the scale or the depth of this problem. So the research is designed to flag up issues of relevance to be considered moving forward. So I suspect that this will be an issue that will be looked at. One of the very important elements to this is the call for victims and survivors to come forward. We are likely to go public with that call at the end of November, but it is incredibly important that we do hear from those victims and survivors, because, for the very reasons that you have said, that they will raise things that we are not aware of, or perhaps that the layout of this doesn't take into account at this time, but that will need to be taken into account as we move forward with additional support and help. So that's a really important aspect of that. It's one that you think MLAs across this House can get involved with helping publicise. But yes, this will be about research, looking at the evidence, identifying what more work needs to be done, and importantly listening to the voices of victims and survivors.
That brings to an end the time for questions to the Deputy First Minister. We now move to questions to the Minister of Education. If we can just take our ease briefly.